for those who can't make it, we'll have it recorded. And welcome to Building a Coaching Culture. And where do you start? Well, first of all, I wanted to just say a little bit about our objectives, and then I'm going to introduce myself a little bit for those of you who do not know me, and also our speaker for today, our expert in this area. And as you can see, it's where do you start in an organization? How will this be measured? These are very important components. What type of training and or certification do people require? And who is going to do this? Who is going to train and develop those people? And where should you possibly obtain a credential? So what I wanted to do is, obviously you can see the screen that I've got in front of me, and it says a bit about me. But here's what I want to say about this and why these webinars that we hold I feel are so important. Is that I'm a longtime coach. I'm a master certified coach. I've been in coaching since 1996. And what I've seen is the power and value of coaching. And I'm absolutely passionate, and we're passionate at Coaching Out of the Box, that everyone learns these skills, and especially in organizations. And here's what I want to just say a little bit about. What if in your organization or in organizations that you work with, you could have improved listening, improved communication, improved team dynamics, improved ability to give feedback, improved conflict resolution, and positively impacted relationships, and an ability to engage with staff, with people in solution-focused kinds of conversations that improve accountability. What would that do in organizations? Well, that's what we're passionate about, and that's what we have found happened, and what we presented to Harvard Medical School, McLean Hospital, and the Institute of Coaching, to do with work we've done in an organization with over 4,200 and some odd people and growing. That's what's so exciting about this. And so a critical piece is, where do you start? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to just briefly introduce our speaker for today, we are so fortunate to have him, and he's our Chief Culture Officer at Coaching Out of the Box. And he brings with him, he has extensive experience in cultural change. That's what Bruce knows. It's Bruce McLeod. He is a senior executive from multinational organization. He has a depth of understanding about the system dynamics and what's involved to ensure success in an organization when you do this, when you embark on building a coaching culture. He's PCC level coach. He's also core faculty for the Royal Roads graduate certificate in executive coaching program in Canada. And as you can see on his slide, he's passionate about what are the places that an organization could go that you never thought possible. So Bruce, I'd like to welcome you and turn the bulk of the presentation over to you.
Thank you very much, Allison. Really appreciate that introduction, and greetings to everybody in the room. Welcome, and glad to have you here with us today. I'm going to be speaking on the topic, as Allison said, sort of where do you begin around building, the implementation of the journey of building a coaching culture. I'm going to ask that if you have questions, feel free to jot them in the chat room, and I'll try to keep up with them in the chat room as we're going, and if not, then my colleagues here will bring to my attention any questions that I may miss. And to get into the chat area, you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat icon there, almost in the middle of the screen at the bottom. And so you can open that if you like to have that dialog box open, so you can follow the chat that goes on throughout the presentation. And encourage you to exchange ideas with others in the room in there, raise a question, share an observation, whatever it is you'd like to do. Use that chat room to help support you in the experience we're going to have today over this next 50 or 60 minutes. So Allison, next slide, please. So I did one presentation probably 2 or 3 months ago, sort of introducing the topic on these webinars for Coaching Out of the Box around the creating of a coaching culture. And I just want to spend a couple moments at the front end just doing a quick review of that for those of you that may not have been on that first one, and as a reminder for those of you that were. But when we're talking about creating a coaching culture, we're talking about, you know, a holistic approach to an organization. When we're talking about creating a culture, you can Google definitions of culture, definitions of organization or corporate culture, and you'll get all kinds of really long-winded, long explanations about what a corporate culture is. And quite frankly, you know, Farm Credit Canada says it best when they define a corporate culture as their corporate culture simply as being the way we do things around here. It's the way things get done. It's the norms and the expectations that people have as a result of having lived within the living reality of an organization. And when we talk about a coaching culture, we can say, although this says a coaching culture is built on organization and leadership beliefs and practices that reflect coaching as a strategic business driver and as a critical talent management tool. In other words, we're not creating a coaching culture for the sake of creating coaching. We're doing it because it is a strategic business driver. There's lots of data out there to support that. I'm going to talk about ROI in just a couple of moments. But the purpose of creating a coaching culture is driven by a business imperative. And that's why coaching as a profession, as a discipline, is growing at such a speed, such a pace right across Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, right down to the smallest of organizations. And linked into that is the people strategy component around talent management. And we hear an awful lot these days about the war for talent and what engages the different generational employees that we're bringing in. And again, coaching has a real role to play in terms of our talent management, both in terms of attraction and retention of key employees. So that's a little bit of context around what we mean by culture. Next, please. I'm a firm believer that, you know, when we talk about culture, whether it's a coaching culture or any other type of culture, that there's two possibilities. Either we have a culture by design, whereby we're deliberately deciding and determining what we want the culture to be, and then building towards that, looking at it from a systems perspective, looking at it in terms of the functions, the skills, the capacity, all of the things that are inherent in an organization, and aligning them and building them towards the culture that we want to create. Or the other is culture by default, which unfortunately the vast majority of organizations find themselves in. In other words, if we don't pay attention to building or being deliberate about the culture we want to build, we will have a culture that evolves simply by the definition of what happens and what is expected around here. So a really simple example would be, if you work in an organization where if the meeting is scheduled to start at 9 o'clock, everybody knows that in fact it doesn't start until 9:10. So it always starts 10 minutes after the appointed hour. That really then is starting to shape your culture, and it's a culture by default. Nobody actually sat down and said, as a culture, we want to start all meetings 10 minutes later than the scheduled time. But because organizations don't pay attention to or hold people accountable to the expectations that they want in their culture, it evolves into being there by default. And many organizations that I have worked with when we go in to do cultural work are really not just engaged in creating what is the new culture they want to create and being deliberate about its design, but how do you undo the old culture? How do you shake those things and change those habits and behaviors, the way we do things around here? How do you change that to a new reality when in some cases it's very deeply entrenched and may in fact be entrenched over decades of experience? So when we talk about culture by design, you're going to hear me talk a little bit today about the importance of language. And when we're talking about creating something new, namely a new culture, we want to make sure that we're using language that is new to the organization. In other words, when we're talking about coaching, we want to be very careful to not be referring to coaching as a coach training as an event or coaching as an initiative. Those are all the standard language, standard types of language that get used in organizations that all carry some baggage and some assumptions about what we mean when we talk about creating a culture by design. So we're going to talk about the importance of language in the communication as a very starting point, right from when you're heading out of the gate to start on this transformation to a new culture, specifically a coaching culture, about the importance of being very specific and deliberate about the language you use, new language, to create a new reality. Allison, next slide, please. I'd invite you as well, as I say, if you've got questions, to please put them in the chat area. And I see here that looks like I've got a question in here. Let me just, bear with me for a moment, sorry. All right, okay, so as I mentioned, we want to be very specific about the language we use, and we also need to be able to demonstrate the return on investment for embarking on this cultural transformation. Because culture, by definition, covers all aspects, every system in the organization and all aspects of the organization, it's a significant investment for organizations to make a decision to create a culture of any kind, whether it's a culture of accountability or a coaching culture, for example. The challenge in the coaching profession, as many of you will know, is that it is very, very difficult to effectively demonstrate return on investment in the traditional manner. So there on the slide, you have what is the traditional formulation or calculation for calculating ROI. And when you look at some of these retrospective studies that have been done, and some of them, quite significant population sizes. The Manchester study looked at more than 100 executives. The other studies, 10 executives, 30 executives. And when the results were applied using that return on investment formula, you get return on investments, as you see here, 570%, 689%, 788%, which isn't to say that there's anything wrong with the calculation, except that it really doesn't fit with the type of impact and the type of change we see when we're trying to measure coaching. When I go back to my days as a senior executive, I can imagine sitting in front of my executive team, pitching an idea to them about something that I would suggest might be very helpful for our organization, and trying to convince them that there's a possibility that it would have a 600 to 800% return on investment. I might probably get laughed out of the room if I was to come up with those types of numbers. So the coaching as a profession has really started to turn its mind away from, not entirely away from ROI, but certainly to a heavier emphasis on ROE, or return on expectations. So what are you expecting when you create a coaching culture? These are all things that are really foundational around where it is you need to start when you're going to look at introducing a coaching culture, because it's really important, as we talked about last time, to make sure that you have the buy-in of the most senior leaders who control the levers in the organization to free up the resources and make the commitments necessary that are necessary and required to bring about something as significant as a change in culture. So a lot of organizations are now starting to look on return on expectations. And let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Many organizations now have been doing employee engagement surveys for a number of years. Some as long as 10 or 15 years ago started doing employee engagement surveys and have a track record, a baseline against which to measure progress using that particular data point. And I could select any number of different data points, but I'm just using employee engagement because it's one of the more common ones out there. Well, when we look at employee engagement data and we see in there things, for example, where employees are rating engagement relative to their manager, there's typically some questions in that area of an employment engagement survey around things like, my manager values my opinion, my manager regularly seeks my input. Those types of questions that get measured in the employee engagement survey, which all roll up then to the total organizational survey. Well, we know for a fact that, and lots of data to support this, that there are many data points in an employee engagement survey that coaching can positively impact. So if you think about a coach in an environment, you think about a manager in an environment that has been command and control or has been leaning towards command and control, and coaching is introduced as a skill and supported by the organization in all the ways necessary to allow that manager to use those coaching skills, you would fully expect, or you would expect a return on your expectation that the questions around my manager seeks my input, my manager values my contribution, you would expect those data points to go up if coaching is being used effectively. And so what many organizations are doing is moving away from the traditional definition of ROI and moving to ROE and creating what I'll call scorecards of individual data points that they can measure as a way to track their return on expectation. And we at Coaching in the Box have developed something called Coaching Quotient, which is designed to do that very thing, to help organizations pick a score, develop a scorecard that's going to match the data points that they have, that's going to allow them to measure the return on expectation and get away from sort of that broad number of return on investment. So again, that's a really important piece out of the gate, because it's going to be important to get that buy-in that's necessary in order to start the journey of creating a culture by design. So next slide, please. So I want to talk primarily today about the coaching roster. In other words, when we think about building a coaching culture, one of the things we need to do, once we've got the groundwork laid, we've got the senior level sponsorship that's required, we have the ground tilled and ready to be planted, so to speak. The first introduction into the organization is often the introduction of coaching through the use of a coaching roster. Having said that, sometimes what will happen as a preliminary step to actually providing availability to individuals in the organization to coaching is to have the senior executive all work with coaches for a period of time as well, before you start to introduce it to the organization. Again, as a way to lead and model by example, as a way for the senior executives to really understand and buy into the value of coaching. Because for those of you that are coaches in the room, you will know what I mean when I say that I could have people tell me about coaching till they were blue in the face, but until I experienced it, I didn't really understand what the power of it was. So a lot of organizations that are looking to create this culture by design around coaching will start by having their senior executives experience coaching, typically then through external coaches, as a way to get them familiar with what coaching is and to create champions and sponsors in the organization. Once you've got that back level support and everything you need to roll, then you're introducing the coaching roster. In other words, where are the coaches in the organization going to be? Who is going to have access to them? What are the types of things that these coaches are going to need to be successful? All those types of questions, which we're going to give consideration to over the next little while. So it really is the centerpiece of the delivery mechanism. Now, when I put here in the slide, where is it housed? What I mean by that is typically organizations will put the coaching function or the coaching roster or whatever you want to call it, whatever variation of that the organization is using, it will typically be housed in human resources. Now, there's nothing wrong with it being housed in human resources, and please don't take what I'm going to say to be a slight on the HR function. I spent a good part of my career as an executive, senior HR executive, so I have a special affinity for HR. However, the challenge with housing coaching in HR is that it needs to be there really only on a temporary basis, so to speak. And the reason I say that is that a lot of the data that has showed that organizations that have not been successful in making the transformation to a coaching culture, one of the top reasons that they have discovered leading to that lack of success is that HR originally housed the coaching function and HR continued to house the coaching function over the long term. And the message that sends to an organization often is that this is an HR initiative. In other words, here comes HR again. They've got another training event for us. They've got another thing that we're going to do, sort of the flavor of the month. We're going to, yes, we've invested big dollars on training and given HR all this increased capacity, etc. But meanwhile, my sales team could really use a couple more salespeople because I know there's a market out there to capture sales that we're not capturing now. And so, that's sort of the downside of the negative side of what starts to happen in organizations when coaching remains housed in HR. Because think about what we're doing here. We're not introducing an initiative. We're not just building skill in the organization around coaching. We're trying to transform the culture. And so if we're trying to transform the culture, we need to have coaching embedded across the organization so that we have coaches in operation. We have coaches that are employed and housed in operational units, that are housed and live in functional units like finance or communications, HR, etc. Now, it makes sense to start it out of a place like HR, but you need to do so right from the beginning with the idea of how quickly can we get it out into the organization and out of the hands, if you like, or out of the perception that this is an HR initiative. And so what I have seen some organizations do is take this whole, right from the get-go, the initial housing of the coaching roster, and place it in the CEO's office. There's something about having that placed in the CEO office that really sends a strong message to the organization about the broadness and the scope of this work around transforming culture. Because at the end of the day, the CEO, in any culture initiative, the CEO has to be on board with the culture that is trying to be created, or it's going to be a very, very tough, and I would suggest in most cases, unsuccessful venture. So there's real power in considering having it housed in the CEO function, or maybe jointly in the CEO function and HR initially, with an idea to get it out of both of those areas as prudently possible and get it embedded into the rest of the organization. So the coaching isn't seen as an HR item or a CEO office item. It's seen as that's where it was started to get it into the organization, but now coaching is embedded and entrenched everywhere in every corner of the organization. Really important thing to give consideration to up front. And I'll talk in a few moments around the communication piece around that in the launching of the coaching type work. So when we think about, this coaching roster, what are the specific things that the organization needs to consider? So if you were a coach on the roster, what would you need, or what would you need to know from the organization? What questions would you have about how this is going to work? Because this is brand new. This is not just an initiative or a one-off training event. This is going to be about the quote unquote way we do things around here. That definition of culture that Farm Credit Canada has coined, and I think so appropriately so. Next slide, please. And I'm going to stop there just before I go into the next slide and just ask, are there any questions? I feel, one of the things that challenges of being on a webinar is I'm looking at myself in the camera and talking, and can't read the audience and see whether or not there's anything there. So please, if you have a question, just type it in the chat area there, and I'll just pause for a moment to capture anything that people may raise. How do you get each on board with giving up control? Well, so that's a great question, actually. And I think what's really important in that, in my experience, is to make sure that they never have control. In other words, it's difficult to give up. It's not difficult to give up control if you never had it. So part of it is in around the messaging around what the staging of this is going to be over the introduction of coaching into the organization, so that it is understood up front, both by HR and by the rest of the organization, that we're starting it here. The seed is being planted here, but our long-term strategy, our midterm and long-term strategy, is to get it out of HR and embed it into the various operational units in the organization as we go. And so, sort of casting your mind forward, what I've seen, what some organizations have done is trained and housed the coaches in HR and then placed those HR sort of similar along the lines of functional HR business partners, but have taken the coaches that were originally housed in HR and actually redeployed them to operational units and have them now reporting in to the operational managers and housed in the operational unit, so that you're just taking that expertise from HR and moving it into another unit so that it now becomes entrenched in part of that unit's function. Because let's face it, when we talk about corporate culture, every business unit in the organization has its own subculture. And so it's going to be very important for the coaches to be as aware and living and understanding that subculture if they're going to be able to effectively service those managers and employees. Yeah, help them change their view of what success looks like. Absolutely. So success isn't that we as HR have created this this monument to ourselves called coaching. Success is defined by getting it embedded in functional units across the organization. Really good point, Alma. Thank you for raising that. How do you decouple a coaching culture from a strategic talent management plan that is designed to give high potentials, unique development opportunities, or should you decouple it? Again, great question. My inclination would be, and it's going to depend obviously on the circumstance in the organization, but I wouldn't necessarily decouple it. I mean, I think high potentials are a great place, and a lot of organizations will start with this sort of the transition of introducing coaching into the organization will often be, as I said earlier, getting senior executives experiencing coaching first, and then moving to the high potentials, and then to the broader organization. So then maybe to managers, and then to all employees. So that there's a strategic plan about how you're introducing coaching, because you just can't go into an organization and all of a sudden, boom, everybody's got coach training and coaching support and coaching experience. So often it will be senior executives, high potentials, managers, and then the rest of the organization. And there's an important message in that staging, particularly if organizations have some of the old baggage around around coaching, where coaching was brought in the early days as sort of the last ditch effort to save somebody before they got exited out of the organization. If you're going to create a coaching culture, one of the things that you want to be very deliberate about creating is the optics that coaching is about taking good to great or great to greater, not broken to fixed, not last resort before you get exited out of the organization. So depending on what the history and the baggage around the word coaching or previous attempts at introducing coaching have been, it will be really important for you up front to convey the message about what is the purpose and intention behind coaching, and that it is not a performance management tool per se. It is a development tool for everybody in the organization, so that individuals and organization can go from good to great. Okay, so back to then some of the specifics around the coaching roster. So communication strategy. This speaks a little bit what I was just talking about. Making sure that from the get-go, even for people that you're not necessarily introducing coaching to initially, so if you've decided that you're going to start with, let's just use the model of starting with executives, then moving to your high potentials, and then over time moving to your managers, and then the organization, start communicating to everybody right from the beginning, so that the first time they hear the communication about this coaching isn't when it's going to directly impact them, because now they're going to coaching training, or their managers are now going to start coaching them. Your communication strategy needs to be broad enough to be able to answer the questions as to who is going to be, who is going to be coached and who are going to be coaches, both initially, and what your strategy is to roll it out across the organization. Why it is we're engaging in coaching, again, back to trying to dispel some of those myths of the culture by default, which the culture by default may have seen and understood coaching as being a remedial performance management on your way out the door type tactic. What do we mean by coaching? How are we going to roll it out? How are we going to coach? And when is this going to happen? So a timeline around it. starting out of the gate with an overarching communication strategy that you will then implement through every phase of the development and introduction of even the coaching roster in and of itself is going to be critically important in terms of helping people understand the context and the nature and the reasons behind the business imperative that you've undertaken, including, I would suggest, sharing with them some of the thoughts around what are the returns on expectations. What are you expecting to see different? What's the, back to the idea of the WIFM, what's in it for me? So if I'm reading a communication strategy, or sorry, if I'm reading an element of a communication strategy that's being sent out to the organization, what can I read in there? What will I see in there that's going to make my life better? What's going to make my job easier? What's going to make me more engaged, etc. So an overarching communication strategy is a really critical and important starting point for the rolling out in whatever fashion you decide to introduce coaching into the organization. Part of that communication strategy will need to also include some direction and clarity around confidentiality. This is one of the challenges with introducing coaching, whether you're creating a coaching culture or just providing coaching skills to managers, et cetera, in the organization, is that unlike other tools in your toolkit, so to speak, the element and the importance of confidentiality in the role of a coach is something that organizations have to get their heads around. So what do we mean by confidentiality? Does that mean that if I am a coach and I'm coaching employee Bob, who reports to employee Sally, that I don't ever share anything with Sally about the conversations I've had with Bob? How then the question you'll get from organizations, if that's the stance you take, is, well, how then will we know if we're getting any return on our investment? How will we know if the development plans that Bob has set out are actually being actioned on? How will we know those things? So direction and clarity around confidentiality is going to be a very important piece. And we could do a whole webinar on different confidentiality and accountability structures that organizations set up. But it is really important, again, right from the beginning, to set the stage to be able to dispel any of the naysayers or skeptics that are saying, well, yeah, no way am I going to be coached. They're going to go tell my manager, or they're going to tell somebody, or setting the stage around and what confidentiality things shared. In fact, there are lots of structures to set up what I refer to as triangle coaching sessions, where the manager of the person I'm coaching and myself and the coachee themselves, the three of us, have periodic sessions together to talk about the progress of the coaching relationship. And there are boundaries about what is fair game to be sharing in those conversations and what isn't. But again, if you want to set it up for success right from the beginning, people have to be clear around what confidentiality means and how it is going to be executed in the organization. The next question then becomes, how are coaches selected? So if you're looking at building a coaching roster, who is on the coaching roster? There's all kinds of questions in here to consider around, what are the qualifications of people? Do we want our internal coaches to have International Coach Federation credentials? Do we want to provide training for, external training for them that are going to allow them to fast track towards getting a certain credential, a certified executive coach, or an ACC, PCC, or MCC? And what level of experience, if any, do they require in order to be placed on that coaching roster? And again, there's a great opportunity from a cultural perspective here to really gain some momentum for the coaching initiative around looking for opportunities to develop internal people into these coaching roles. Have them seen as a great opportunity where they're going to get lots of opportunity for professional development, opportunity to be part of something new and exciting in the organization. There's a real way to use this building of your coaching roster as a momentum builder for the cultural change you're trying to bring about. But part of what organizations have to wrestle with is what is the level of qualification and experience that we want to bring to the mix. I would suggest, again, although notwithstanding my comments a moment ago about looking for opportunities to develop people internally, many organizations will bring in a certain percentage of external coaching expertise, hire them into, let's assume for a moment that it is housed in HR as its starting place, only a temporary home. Let's assume for a moment then that they bring in a couple of experienced coaches and hire them into HR. That then gives the internal people who are developing into coaches the opportunity to be mentored and developed by people who are more experienced. It also it gives credibility to the coaching program because of the experience and the credentials that the people that are coming in are. And quite frankly, what you will see that happens over time, which is actually a double-edged sword, is that people that really have been selected and really embrace this opportunity and really go for it, so to speak, in terms of becoming a coach, the challenge actually becomes retention for them. Because once they've gotten a taste of, and there's certainly data to support this, that once coaches have gotten a taste of what it's like to be in an organization who is launching on creating a coaching culture, once they've gotten so far along in that with that organization, they're hungry again to have that experience again. And so retention becomes a problem because they're now, if they're good, they're now looking for other opportunities in other organizations to go and duplicate what they've done or do it even better, or a variety of things. But there is research out there that shows that once you've got your coaching roster up and developed, that retention can become a challenge. The other element that's going to be important in terms of, again, you're trying to create a coaching culture, a culture by design. Part of what design means is that there's some predictability in it. In other words, there's some certainty. There's some things we know that we can hang our hat on relative to the culture. And one of those things as it relates to coaching is a consistent model. So there are all kinds of coaching models out there, as you may be well aware. There's the GROW model and all kinds of different models. Obviously, I'm biased, thinking that the coaching out of the box has a 5-5-5 coach training program, and I can tell you that when I graduated from Royal Roads and was looking for a tool to add to my box, coaching out of the box, after much research, was the one I selected because I do believe it's a fabulous model. And what we have found in organizations, and we've had over 16,000 people through the program now, is that organizations find it simple in terms of people being able to grasp it and actually practice and use the coaching skills. And so that's really important, so that you have a consistent model, so that if I'm in the finance department, and if I'm a coach in the financing department and I get transferred over to communications, that all of a sudden the people that I'm now coaching in communications aren't going to be subjected to a new approach or a new model, if you like, of coaching. So creating and selecting a model that the organization will use as part of their culture by design. So what is the model you're choosing? How does it support the culture you're trying to create? And how can you bring that consistency across the organization? Again, please feel free to jump in, because I know I'm talking a lot here and talking at a fair pace, but you will have the recording that you can go back and listen to as well again, and can certainly reach out through Allison to ask any questions that may occur for you after the webinar is over. So I've got here training for everyone with a question mark. It's one thing that we find when we're working with organizations around cultural transformation is it's one thing to be a coach, it's another thing entirely to be coached. So there may be, you may decide as an organization for cost benefit and all kinds of reasons that you're not going to provide coach training, how to be a coach, or provide coach training skills to everybody in the organization. But in a coaching culture, everybody is going to get coached. So everybody is going to be coached, or have people using a coach-like approach to them. And in organizations where you sort of draw the line as to how far sort of down the organization you're going to go in terms of providing coach training skills. What organizations will do is provide, whether it's a half day or a 1-day workshop for all employees, to expose them to what coaching is, so that, you know, as they're being coached, they have an understanding, or they have an understanding and an appreciation of what is happening to them. And let me give you an example of why that's important. If your organization's culture by default is that, as a manager, when an employee comes to me with a question, I give them the answer, which is typically a fairly typical definition of what happens in a lot of cultures by default. People tend to get promoted because of their technical expertise. And so many managers have some of their self-identity and also have a belief about about what's expected of them, in that they need to be the subject matter experts and have the answer. So an employee comes to them, asks them a question, they give them the answer, the employee goes away and does it. In a coaching culture, when managers are using coaching skills, they're now giving an answer. They're asked, if I've been going to my manager every day for 5 years asking a question and getting an answer, and now I go and ask my manager a question and get a question, I'm going to wonder what's going on. Is the manager testing me? Doesn't he or she think I know my job? So it's really important to lay the foundation, not just in terms of how to, not just in terms of providing skills for people who are going to be coaching, but also helping people be prepared for what it means to be coached, so that they understand that, you know, the premise behind a coaching culture is that we stop giving people a fish and we start teaching people how to fish. And that can be a very significant change. There's lots of security for employees to go to for many employees, there's lots of security found in going to their manager and having their manager tell them what to do. Because if it doesn't work, then it's the manager's fault. If I do what the manager tells me, that I don't have to guess and do something that may not be what the manager wants. So turning the tables and asking the employee to help find their own solutions and their own best answer to the questions that they're bringing can be quite a cultural transformation, and does require some support and awareness for them about what it means to be coached. And so again, that idea, training for everyone, training probably isn't the best word there, but probably it's more about awareness for everyone. Does everyone have an awareness of what's happening in this organization? Why all of a sudden when you go to your manager asking you a question versus giving you the answer? I'm going to go to skip down to the one after the next one, which is how are coaches and coachees matched? This is also a really important element in introducing a coaching culture, in terms of what are the dynamics at play relative to matching coaches and coachees. Because think about this for a moment. There is the potential for me to be coaching someone. So let's say I am a formal coach working in let's say human resources, and I'm coaching someone in the organization who 6 months or 2 years from now ends up being my boss. Or I'm coaching someone above me in the organization, and 3 years from now, through a series of lateral transfers and changes, etc., I end up being their boss. Think of the potential implications for that and the impact on the coaching, the impact on the relationship, given the nature of confidentiality of a coaching conversation. And how do we manage that? What is the process for matching coaches and coachees, such that it's not entirely possible, but to the degree possible, to be able to preserve relationship and minimize situations down the road that may create conflict or may create challenges. So that whole thing about how coaches and coachees are matched, to what degree does the coachee have the opportunity to say, no, I don't want to be coached by Bruce? To what degree does Bruce have the ability to say, no, I don't want to coach Allison? So some organizations will advertise their roster and have employees, they'll know that, again, if the roster is originally housed in HR and there's 10 coaches in HR, I'll look at the 10 coaches and I will identify 2 or 3 that I might be interested in working with, and have an introductory chat with each of them, and give the coaches and the coachee both the sort of the right refusal if they don't think that that is a good match for them for whatever reason. Some organizations take the approach that we will simply, HR or whoever is wherever it is housed, will simply match you, the coach and the coachee, and that's the match you get. So again, from a cultural perspective, the way that you match coaches and coachees needs to be aligned with the culture that you're trying to build. Remember that we're talking about building a culture by design. So every decision we make relative to creating a coaching culture is going to have implications to the culture in terms of getting us closer to or further away from the culture that we've outlined as the one we want to build towards. And then, the ongoing development of coaching skills. So, many organizations will start with one-to-one coaching and migrate over time to group coaching or team coaching. Some of them will develop in-house mentor coaching support for the coaches to get mentor support right within the organization versus having to go external. So, what are the ongoing development elements for the coaches as they remain in those rosters? And again, if we have coaches spread out throughout the organization, it's ongoing development for all of the coaches. It's not just the ones that might be housed in HR. It is ongoing for all coaches. So I just want to capture a couple of things in the chat area that I want to take a look at. Okay, so I'm curious, what's the starting ratio of coaches to the number of employees? Okay, great question. And unfortunately, I'm reticent to give an actual answer to that because it depends on a couple of factors, Alma. It depends on some organizations, for example, don't launch into saying, okay, we're going to have a full-time coach, like we're going to create a full-time coach position. What typically happens is that people will have it will become a hybrid. So where I've seen the most typical hybrid I've seen is a business partner, an HR business partner, who then, maybe is looking after 2 business units, goes down to looking after 1 business unit, therefore freeing up half their time, and the other half of that time is now filled with coaching. So it really depends on what structure you're using, whether or not you're going to have full-time coaches, people who that's all they do is provide coaching support, versus what I will call the hybrid model, where people will continue to have half a job that is functional in a particular area and the other half coaching. So again, I use the example of HR, but it could be I'm an accounts payable manager in a finance department, and that half of my job is functional around the accounts payable process, and the other half of my job is around formal coaching. So it really does depend, and it depends on, again, the speed of uptake. You want to make sure that it's balancing capacity with demand. So what are you anticipating the demand is going to be initially, and do you have the capacity to meet that demand? Quite frankly, there is more. I have seen greater success where there is more demand than coaching capacity than the other way around. Because if you create too much capacity before the demand is there, then that allows people to be able to look and say, oh, there's HR with a bunch of resources now again, and they don't have enough work to do, right? So by having sort of that tension between capacity and demand, you can generate some real, well, I want that. When am I going to get when am I going to get access to a coach? I've been on the waiting list for 3 weeks now, or been on the waiting list for a month. The other thing that depends on, that's an element in that question, Alma, is whether or not the coaching is, what is the structure of the coaching relationship? So if I am going to be coached in the organization, is that a formal coaching that I'm going to have an hour every 2 weeks for 3 months? Is it that I'm going to have an hour once every 3 weeks for 12 months? Is it that I'm going to have access to an assigned coach as needed? All of those types of things around your design, again, the design of the coaching program, are going to impact what it is you're going to need in order to meet the capacity, to meet the demand. And again, all of those elements factor into what is the design you're trying to create. you know, ideally, I want to be able to have access to a coach when I need one, or maybe I need it for a developmental piece. I'm going to be going on I'm going to be on a secondment for 3 months at a project management department. And part of that secondment is to provide me with a coach for those 3 months to help me through that, to support me through that secondment, to particular area. I know that's not a real specific answer, but it is dependent on a lot of elements. Wayne, the reason I love coaching at all levels is it squeezes the middle management layer with an understanding from above and below, really helps to drive the coach culture. Absolutely, Wayne. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It does create it, and that for one, you know, and that's a reason why, you know, when you're talking about your communication strategy, the importance of speaking to middle management, because they're the ones in the middle. They're the ones that if the top level, if the executive have been experiencing coaching, they're all on board, they're pumped and ready to go. They have expectations about what's going to happen when middle manager gets the skill set. The people below them, the people that the managers are coaching, are going to be placing a lot of demands on them too as well, in terms of not just the coaching itself, but understanding what it is they're doing, helping them get acclimatized to what is this new culture, what does it mean for me, how do I function in this, because there is some resettling, if you like, into a new norm, which is part of creating the new culture. So with that, you know, I've given you a bit of an overview of the coaching roster here, and as I say, there's much more that we could go into, and perhaps you know, we'll have another webinar on this topic another couple of months from now to continue on this discussion. But I do want to stop there, and thank you for your questions and for your attention. Alison will be circulating the recording, and by all means, feel free to reach out through Alison to myself or directly to me at Coaching Out of the Box, Chief Culture Officer. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Alison. Thank you.
Wow, Bruce, that's a lot of fabulous information that you've provided in a very short space of time. And I just wanted to say that, yes, I want to let you know that absolutely we are here to support you in doing that. This is what we do. This is our expertise with over 16,000 people, and I've got some links, etc., that are up on the screen at the moment, and I wanted just to direct your attention to that, as well as you can absolutely contact me directly. Yes, the slides will be available. We'll be sending them out as a follow-up after the webinar, and I just want to kind of tag on to Wayne's comment and what we've seen happen in organizations where they invest in everyone learning coaching skills. Not everyone becoming certified coaches, that's not realistic, but to be more coach-like in the way they interact and to have more of those kinds of conversations. And that's what I was speaking about earlier, about the results that we presented to Harvard Medical School, was where people were developed to be coach-like and have those conversations, not necessarily all to become certified coaches or to all be having scheduled coaching appointments. Absolutely, that happens too. And the more people that can be developed who get used to this way of interacting, who get used to this way of having those kinds of conversations, the changing the world piece, yes, absolutely. But that is the key. And what we're seeing when an organization does this is that there's this incredible trickle-down impact that we saw in this one large organization in particular that we work with. And I just want to share something else that I literally got in an email earlier today. And it was to inspire people here. It was a client organization that we work with. And they reported, and this is after 2 years, and they were doing, they've been growing slowly. They've been developing people in their organization. They've already had 16% increase in retention with a value of $150,000 based on recruitment and training costs. I'm literally reading this. 42% positive difference in number of high potentials who have successfully completed a management certification within the 9-month period from the date of hire. and a decrease of 67 days in the average days it takes to get certified. This was in a manufacturing organization. And that to me is incredibly valuable. And that's because there were people in the organization who learned some coaching skills. They're not all certified. They're using a coach approach in their interactions with these people. They're asking those questions. They're listening. They're coming at it from a perspective of believing that that person has what, you know, within them, and they're bringing that out by having those coach-like conversations. Sometimes they're in the hallway for 5 minutes. Sometimes it's, you know, at the lunch table, etc. So I just thought it was apropos to share this after Bruce gave us so much in-depth information about what's involved in when an organization is doing this and building a coaching culture. And there's so many key components to it. So I just wanted to also I'm looking at, oh, we're doing good. Now, I just want to check while we've got a few minutes left. Is there anyone else who has a question or a comment that they would like to make? If you could raise your hand, you know how to do that. Let's see. Oh, yes, I'm going to promote you to a panelist. I think it's Suzanne. I'm not sure. Suzanne, please, go ahead. We need to unmute you. Unmute. Somehow I can't do that for some weird reason. It's suddenly just not allowed me to do that. Oh, there you are. Yes, go ahead. Suzanne? Okay, somehow we're struggling to hear her, but I will allow everybody to. I apologize to. Oh, she's going to type her message. Great, Suzanne. Thank you. We'll watch for it here. And I see that you know, our intention with these webinars is to always provide value to you, so that this 1 hour of your time that you take out of your very, very busy days, that you're receiving value. And as you can see, we're passionate that everyone gets coaching skills. And I'm just waiting for Suzanne's message. And I'm just going to look, maybe I missed it in another spot. I can't quite see that. Okay, had problems. Okay, well listen, okay, well thanks so much and please feel free to email myself and ask questions. Oh great, nice to hear that the program's been good at PHSA Forensic. Okay, well thank you so much for your attention, and have a great rest of your day, everybody. And what if everyone had coaching skills? All right. Bye, and thanks again, Bruce. Okay, bye everybody.